Well, hey there, friends. I'm your host, Penny, and this is your monthly bonus dose of Criminally Nerdy. Mike. Guess what day it is? Hump Day. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Also, sorry if you guys can hear my neighbor mowing in the background. It's that time of year. I wasn't going to do one of these since I like to keep things kind of down to business on the bonuses, but I saw it and I couldn't help but let you guys know that this episode is airing on May 1st, which is not only Phone In Sick Day, but also Rotate Your Beer Day. I can't not tell you to call into work. Try a new beer. Get day drunk. Your boss will understand. In fact, you might want to go ahead and crack one now. You might need it to deal with the lunacy of this story. Today, I'm going to be telling you about the Stanford Prison Experiment, what is considered to be one of the most controversial and disturbing psychology experiments of all time. The goal of the experiment was to study the power of roles, rules, symbols, group identity, and situational validation of behavior. A secondary focus was to help better understand antisocial behavior. I'll be honest, I thought I was pretty well informed on this topic, and that I knew how I felt about the study and what it yielded. It wasn't until I really dug in that I realized I didn't know a damn thing. Some of my sources for this episode were prisonexp.org, experiments.stanford.edu, apa.org, the Stuff You Know podcast, and You're Wrong About podcast did excellent episodes on this topic if you want to give them a listen. There is a movie called The Stanford Prison Experiment that was released in 2015. It's a docudrama, and from everything I've read, it seems to be quite well done, but it took a lot of creative license. So, in effort to keep myself from confusing fact with fiction, I'm going to hold off on watching it until after this episode. Though, to be fair, the experiment itself walks one hell of a thin line between the two. In the summer of 1971, more than 70 applicants answered an ad in a local paper. The ad read, quote, "Male college student needed for psychological study of prison life, $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks beginning August 14th. For further information and applications, come to room 248, Jordan Hall, Stanford University." Okay, so $15 a day in 1971 would be roughly $116 per day in 2024. I'm not going to turn my nose up at that. Like $116, that's almost enough to buy all of the ingredients you need to make a sandwich. And I really like sandwiches, so I get it. Applicants were given a battery of diagnostic and personality tests. Those with psychological problems, medical problems, a history of crime, or a history of substance abuse were not considered. After the screenings were complete, 24 college students from the United States and Canada were selected. They were all male, middle class, well-educated, and predominantly white. There was only one Asian American participant. What these men had applied for was the Stanford Prison Experiment, which was developed to examine the psychological effects of perceived power and authority, and was overseen by Professor Zimbardo and his research team. His research team consisted of Craig Haney, Curtis Banks, David Jaffe, and an ex-convict consultant, Carlo Prescott, who spent over 15 years in San Quentin. To be in the experiment, participants did have to sign consents, part of which said, quote, "The nature of the research project has been fully explained to me, including, without limitation, the fact that paid volunteers will be randomly assigned to the role of either prisoner or guard for the duration of the study. I understand that participation in the research project will involve a loss of privacy, that I will be expected to participate for the full duration of the study, that I will only be released from participation for reasons of health deemed adequate by medical advisors to the project or for other reasons deemed appropriate by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and that I will be expected to follow directions from staff members of the project or from other participants in the research project." Not only was the writing in the consent pretty vague, but by signing it, it released Professor Zimbardo from any liability. I wasn't there, so I can't really say what they meant by the project being fully explained, but something tells me these participants had no clue what they were getting themselves into. Along with their consultant, Zimbardo and his team renovated the basement of Jordan Hall into what resembled a prison. The prison cells were made by removing the doors from the laboratory rooms and replacing them with specially made doors that had steel bars and cell numbers. This is already sounding pricey. Wondering where they got the funding for this little project? I sure did. The U.S. Office of Naval Research. I'm not even going to go into how many questions I have, but man, oh man, would I have loved nothing more than to be in that pitch meeting. Zimbardo, who had appointed himself the superintendent, and his undergrad student David Jaffe, who he had posing as the warden, had put cameras in to monitor the activity and an intercom system that he could use to listen in on everything the guards and prisoners were saying and also to make announcements. This makeshift prison had no windows or clocks, so that the prisoners would have a distorted sense of time. Was one of his other consultants also working for casinos in Vegas? By the simple flip of a coin, half of the selected were assigned to be guards, and half were assigned to be prisoners. Participants were not told when they were going to be arrested, so that there would be a genuine element of surprise. They were arrested at their homes on Sunday, August 15th, 1971, by actual Palo Alto police officers. They were arrested for various offenses such as armed robbery and burglary. They were handcuffed, searched, placed into the back of a police car, and taken to the police station. Once there, they were Mirandized, fingerprinted, and had their mugshots taken. They were then blindfolded and placed in a holding cell before being transported to the mock prison that had been built in the basement of Jordan Hall. When prisoners arrived at the, quote, Stanford County Jail, Jordan Hall, they were strip-searched and deloused. They were given a smock, which looked like a hospital gown without an opening, and told they couldn't wear anything underneath it. Their smocks had identification numbers on them that they were to memorize. They were only allowed to identify themselves by the numbers. In lieu of shaving their heads, all prisoners were forced to wear a pantyhose over their heads as a stocking cap. They were all given rubber sandals and wore a heavy chain around their ankle that remained bolted even when they slept. All of this was in an attempt to dehumanize them, remove their sense of individuality, and remind them of the oppressive nature of their situation. These measures were not only supposed to affect the prisoners, but the guards as well. It's a lot harder to treat someone terribly when you know who they are. When they're stripped of their individuality and reduced to a number, it makes it much easier for them to be seen as less than or below those in power. There were 9 prisoners and 9 guards. Each set had 3 substitutes. There were 3 cells with 3 prisoners assigned to each. The cells were very small, only 7 foot by 10 foot, just enough space for the 3 men and their cots. There was a small corridor that was used as the yard where the prisoners were allowed to move around and eat. Guards were given a uniform of khaki shirts and khaki pants, a whistle that they wore around their neck, a billy club, and mirrored sunglasses so the prisoners could not see their eyes. The guards worked in teams of 3 in 8-hour shifts. While the prisoners were kept in tight cells, the guards were kept separately and given not only breaks, but had access to areas for rest and relaxation. The first day went by without incident. Counts were then conducted at 2:30 a.m. Prisoners were awakened, taken into the hall, and forced to recite their ID number over and over. They would have to start over if they said it wrong, if they couldn't say it backwards, if they didn't say it fast enough, if they said it too fast. And this was the first time the guards were given a taste of being in a position of authority. The next day, all hell started to break loose. The prisoners ripped off their stocking caps and their prisoner numbers. They pushed their beds against the cell doors to keep the guards out, and then proceeded to taunt the guards. This is why you don't wake people up at 2:30 in the morning. They get pretty cranky. You wake me up at 2:30 in the morning for no damn good reason, you had better believe that Petty Penny is coming for you. The morning shift guards blamed the night shift guards for being too easy on the prisoners, so the night shifters agreed to stay and help the morning shift get things under control. They also called in all 3 substitute guards. They used a fire extinguisher to shoot freezing cold carbon dioxide into the cells, forcing the prisoners away from the door. Once the guards were able to get inside, they stripped the prisoners, removed their beds, and put the ones that they considered to be the ringleaders in isolation. Isolation, also called the hole, was a 2 foot by 2 foot closet. 2 foot by 2 foot. Like, take a minute and really think about how small that is. I am an average sized woman, and my shoulders are about 1 foot 4 inches wide. Yes, I measured just for this. So that means if I personally stood in the center of this closet, I would only have 4 inches on either side of me before I was hitting a wall. That would drive anyone bananas in no time flat. The prisoners who weren't put into isolation were forced to do push-ups with either a guard's foot on their back or another prisoner sitting on their back. I can't even do one push-up. Not one. I'd have to call it. Just call it. I'm done. Since the guards realized that all 9 of them could not stay on duty all of the time, they decided to resort to psychological tactics in order to maintain control. This is where they came up with the brilliant idea of the privileged cell so that they could break up the solidarity of the prisoners. The 3 prisoners who were placed in the privileged cell were given, you guessed it, special privileges. They were allowed to have their uniforms and beds back, allowed to wash up and brush their teeth, and they were also given special food that they were forced to eat in front of the other prisoners who the guards were now withholding food from. Eventually, the guards got bored or something, so they decided to start messing with the prisoners' heads even more than they already were by putting some of the, quote, good prisoners in the holding cells and the, quote, bad prisoners in the privileged cell. The worst guard of them all was the one that the prisoners referred to as John Wayne, a particularly sadistic man with a southern accent. Like, do a crossword, dude. Find something else to do with your time. Anything else. This caused paranoia to set in among the prisoners as they thought that some of them were ratting the others out. They became distrustful of each other, essentially doing exactly what the guards wanted, pitting the prisoners against each other instead of against the guards. Prisoners' every move was at the discretion of the guards at this point. Simply going to the bathroom became a privilege. After lights out at 10 p.m., prisoners were forced to use a bucket in their cells that guards did not allow them to empty. The smell of urine and feces added to the already dismal surroundings. After only 36 hours, inmate 8612, Douglas Copey, appeared to be suffering from a mental breakdown. He had disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, and rage. When the prison consult went in to speak with him, Copey was insulted for being weak. During the next count, he told the other prisoners that they couldn't leave, and it spooked them all. At one point, he went into a rage, cursing and screaming, "Jesus Christ, I'm burning up in here. I can't stand another night. I just can't take it anymore." After being evaluated by a research assistant, he was released. On the 4th day, the prisoners continued to stay divided, believing that some of the others were snitching. Snitches get stitches. Prisoner 819 was beginning to show symptoms of distress, so a priest was called in. 819 refused to speak with him, but instead asked for a doctor. He was in such a state of confusion that when Zimbardo evaluated him, he had to remind the man of his actual identity. This was all happening while he was being harassed by the other prisoners outside who were chanting, "Prisoner 819 is bad. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing," all at the encouragement of the guards. On the 5th day, the study had scheduled a visitation day for family and friends in order to, further simulate the real prison experience. Zimbardo and the guards did their best to manipulate the view that the visitors would get of the prison, largely out of fear of parents pulling their sons from it. They had the prisoners wash up, shave, make sure they were nicely groomed, and then had them polish their cells before feeding them a big dinner. They even recruited a Stanford cheerleader to greet the guests at registration in an attempt to put them at ease. When visitors arrived, they were made to wait for long periods of time before they could see their loved ones. When they finally did get to see them, only 2 could visit at a time and only for 10 minutes while being watched by one of the guards. Several of the parents were concerned about their son's well-being. One mother complained that her son had never looked so bad. So Zimbardo, being a super awesome dude, decided to just, turn the blame on her and asked, "What's the matter with your boy? Doesn't he sleep well?" Zimbardo then turned to the father and said, "Don't you think your boy can handle this?" This got the father all worked up, so he responded, "Of course he can. He's a tough kid." And then he ushered his wife out, telling Zimbardo that they would see him at the next visiting time. The toxic masculinity in that exchange is so fucking sickening. I can't stand it. And super cool how the mom isn't just ignored, but blamed. Who put these fucks in charge? I'm sorry, adult or not, I would have no shame ripping my child out of that situation, no matter what your tiny ego had to say about it. At this time, there were also rumors of an escape plot. Zimbardo had heard that 8612 was coming back with a group of his friends to break the others out. He said that it was out of concern for the safety of all involved in the study that he reached out to the Palo Alto Police Department and asked if they could transfer their prisoners to the old Palo Alto jail. His request was denied, probably due to a little something called false imprisonment. In a last-ditch effort to keep this thing going, they dismantled the prison cells, chained the prisoners together, had bags placed over their heads, and put them in a storage room. The plan was for Zimbardo to wait for this group who was coming to break the participants out, and when they arrived, he would just sit there and smugly tell them, like, oh, the experiment's already over. But the prison break rumors turned out to be just that, rumors. So now they had wasted all of this time and energy dismantling the cells and moving the prisoners, waiting for a breakout attempt that was never going to come. And they were embarrassed. This embarrassment trickled down to the prisoners immediately. Guards escalated their harassment, making the prisoners do repetitive work and humiliating them by having them clean toilets with their bare hands and forcing them to do push-ups and jumping jacks, just anything that they could think of to physically punish them without actually touching them. At one point, the guards were forcing the prisoners to pretend that they were performing sex acts on one another for no reason other than to humiliate them. Like, what are you, fucking 14? Get it together, dude. Also increased the length of the counts to several hours at a time. A priest had come in to visit with the prisoners, and much to the surprise of the researchers, most of them introduced themselves to him by their inmate number, not their name. When one participant was asked what he was doing there, the boy became visibly confused and said that the only way he could get out was with the help of a lawyer. The line between roleplay and reality had not just been blurred, it had been fully crossed. The project had devolved into chaos. Prisoners were completely breaking down mentally, and the guards had become full-on sadistic in the way they were treating them. Zimbardo's then-girlfriend, psychologist Christina Maslick, came to evaluate the conditions. She immediately confronted Zimbardo with her concerns. Color me surprised that out of over 50 people overseeing this research, it took a woman to come in and demand that they shut this shit down. Not that, one of the participants' mothers didn't express her concerns, but they were too busy gaslighting her to take her seriously. Zimbardo agreed, and the experiment that had been slated for 2 weeks was shut down after only 6 days. He published his findings in the Naval Research Review, the International Journal of Criminology, and the New York Times Magazine. He concluded that people quickly conform to social roles, even when the role goes against their moral principle, and that situational factors were largely responsible for the behavior, as none of the participants had ever demonstrated these types of behaviors before. What happened in the basement of Jordan Hall was horrific. These people suffered physical and mental trauma from what they endured. The study was considered groundbreaking and changed the way people viewed how a situation can affect human behavior. It even caused people to ponder the nature of evil, wondering what it was that turned these seemingly normal men into callous monsters when put into a position of power. They also couldn't help but wonder if this would happen to anyone who was in the same situation. What wasn't spoken of often at the time, but thankfully is now, is how tainted this study was from the very beginning. I'm not saying that what these men went through wasn't horrible, because it was. I am not saying that people did not suffer real trauma, because they did. But I am saying that this is not something that we can firmly plant our feet on. I'm no psychology major, so I won't speak to some of the things I read. I'm just going to stick to the things that made sense to me, someone who is of almost average intelligence. Almost. 1. The initial ad itself. By stating that the experiment would be based on prison life, whether intentional or not, it attracted those with a predisposition to authoritarianism. Though participants should be given full disclosure about what they would be participating in prior to consenting to it, they should not have been able to draw those conclusions from the advertisement. 2. Zimbardo appointing himself as the superintendent kept him from being objective. By inserting himself, he tainted his ability to be impartial. 3. The day before the experiment took place, those playing the guard role were actually given an orientation where they were told what they could and couldn't do. They could not physically harm prisoners or withhold food or water from them, but they were given ideas, hint hint, wink wink, nudge nudge, on how to make prisoners' lives miserable and assert their authority. This pushes an agenda and takes the study from empirical to biased. 4. Jaffe, the graduate student playing the role of the warden, was heard later on recordings encouraging the guards to be tougher on prisoners. Again, the power of suggestion here is going to taint the results. Though Zimbardo denies that the guards were coached, in a 2005 article, The prison consultant, Carlo Prescott, said that he had shared the details of the treatment he experienced in San Quentin with the research team prior to the study. He later saw the participants in the guard roles implementing many of those tactics and felt there was no way they would have just inherently known to do those things, having no experience in correction, unless they were told in explicit detail. 5. The prisoner who had a mental breakdown and was released after only 36 hours has stated many times, as recently as 2017, that he faked the breakdown in order to get out because he had a test to study for and the guards were refusing to give him his books. He had agreed to take part in the study because he had this stereotype in his mind of a prisoner, so he assumed he would just be sitting around all day with nothing to do, so he may as well get paid while getting his studying done. 6. The guard who prisoners referred to as John Wayne has also gone on record and said that he was just playing a role. He had done drama in school and was acting like what he thought a prison guard should act like. He admitted that he had even faked the Southern accent and modeled his guard persona from a character in the movie Cool Hand Luke. He stated that anyone who knows him now would laugh at the idea of him being a tough guy because he is quite the opposite in real life. 7. Zimbardo didn't publish his findings in a scientific peer-reviewed journal before releasing it to the public. Though it was eventually published in the official journal of the American Psychological Association, many fellow psychologists saw this as an unorthodox release of findings. They also saw this as an indication that Zimbardo knew he would have trouble convincing others in his field of the validity and the reliability of the study. 8. There was no initial control group, nor was the study easy to replicate. In 2002, the BBC attempted to duplicate it in The Experiment, and the findings were vastly different. One thing that stood out the most was that the mock prisoners were much more assertive. Some say this is due to demand characteristics. The results of the Stanford Prison Experiment were heavily influenced by the participants behaving the way they thought the researchers wanted them to behave. So in summary, anyone in the right situation has the capacity to do terrible things, right? Well, yes, I do think that in the right or wrong situation, most of us are capable of doing things we wouldn't typically do. For instance, am I capable of murder? On most days, no. Catch me on the wrong day? Maybe. Did this study have an impact on my opinions? Well, it used to, but after learning how it was carried out, I can honestly say that it now has less of an impact on my view of humanity than watching 5 minutes of the news does. That's all I've got for you today, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an episode, like next week when we take a look into a decades-old unsolved quadruple murder. And of course, please keep spreading the word. It helps tremendously. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Criminally Nerdy Podcast, Twitter, X, whatever, at Crime Nerd Pod, or shoot me an email anytime at criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, keep it nerdy. Motherfucker. No. Okay. The whole time. Can you heckle someone in a pitch meeting? For fuck's sake. Why can't I say mug? I'm never gonna get through this sentence. Dwight, you ignorant slut. Fucking really, man. I am Iron Man. You would think I would get better at this, but I think I'm getting worse.